We're heading into the busiest time of the year for the video game industry, and that is E3 time, where that is starting around the next week here. And it leads me to kind of an uncomfortable question because of how much the industry has changed and what we saw, especially last year with the pandemic. And the question is, how relevant is E3 to the larger industry these days? And it really seems like things have kind of shifted. Last year, E3 was canceled, like everything was canceled, and no one had time to really plan all digital events kind of this soon into the height of the pandemic. This year, E3 is all digital. There is no physical event. So that is essentially a long period of days that are live streams. You can register for press access and fan access and special things like that, but there's no physical show you are going to, no hands-on with games, no in-person interviews, things like that. So it is fundamentally transformed. But I think even before the pandemic, there were kind of looming questions about E3's relevancy. It's run by the ESA, and more and more kind of major players of the industry, as the way to debut your games has shifted, have opted out of E3 as this kind of must attend, must show everything off deadline that comes around once a year. And so far, we've kind of seen the fruits of that beginning already in terms of how different developers and console manufacturers and everything in between are showing off their games. And we have this kind of collection now where E3 is still the biggest show. We also have Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Show, it's his own variant of E3. We have a bunch of smaller showcase shows, and then we have, kind of most importantly, a bunch of developers and publishers showing off their individual titles sort of whenever they want around this period. This has already kind of started in full force. Sony has famously not attended E3 for the past couple of years. It used to be this big kind of showdown where for years and years it was like Sony versus Microsoft versus Nintendo, and we give them all letter grades and see who won, and it was this big kind of contest among fanboys. And that hasn't really died down to a certain degree. Like, Sony is essentially no longer playing, and in the past week or so they debuted 20 new minutes of footage of Horizon Forbidden West, which is poised to be their big kind of fall release here. And it was a showcase that kind of got the news day all to itself. And this is one kind of trend we've seen with a lot of these bigger debuts, is you do not need to roll up all your news into one individual show that will be 2 hours and talked about for that day, but also there might be another show 3 hours later that people are talking about. So Horizon Zero Dawn, or Horizon Forbidden West, got its own, kind of news cycle for like 48 hours. And now today we're seeing that with EA. EA is also not an official E3 participant. They have their own kind of EA Play show, but they also decided to just debut the trailer for the new Battlefield game, Battlefield 2042, today, and show that off. And they are by far the biggest news story of the day. In terms of the people that still are attending E3, Nintendo always is still a presence, but for the last few years, Nintendo has mostly been just airing a larger direct than normal. Even when there is an in-person show, they just sort of make a pre-made video, and then they will have kind of an ongoing Treehouse live event where various hosts and players and things will just kind of casually talk and go through some of the announcements and maybe play some of the games, but there's no kind of big stage show. The only ones who really kind of do this with E3 these days are Microsoft and Ubisoft. Activision, one of the largest publishers, has been bowing out for years also. Activision Blizzard has BlizzCon, but that has not borne much fruit lately because of Blizzard's slow production. So the only real game that Activision has to produce is the new Call of Duty, which comes out every year on the dot. And they have decided this year, which was announced today, that they will be not debuting that in as a part of E3, as a part of one of the other console showcases, or in any capacity. They will be showing it off in Warzone, in a Warzone event, sometime later this year. And this kind of really speaks to how much things have changed now, because we saw this last year where they were debuting stuff from throughout Warzone 2 with Black Ops, and it's there are all these mechanisms for delivery now where we don't need these kind of set E3 shows. Microsoft still does this because they could do their own show, but they are kind of the largest presence at E3 now, and E3 is a good format for them to kind of blend software and kind of program announcements. they do show off, a good showcase of games, but they're always really trying to plug Game Pass as well. And this is kind of a good opportunity to intersperse, what's coming to Game Pass announcements with new debuts in that sense. So they have kind of stuck around as one of the true, like, kind of last giants of E3 that are still there, and they can kind of by default claim they've won the show every year if the other people aren't really participating in the same capacity. And it's gotten to the point where it's just E3 can be uncomfortable because we have seen many, many examples and kind of learned behind the scenes info of how some developers over the years, like, they have viewed E3 as such like a must hit milestone, like you have to impress at E3, that a lot of them have thrown together like demos and, live gameplay that was not remotely representative of the final product. These like vertical slices that kind of show the concept of what the game could be or should be, but then never actually materialize in the same way, which leads to this kind of disconnect between what was shown at the big E3 debut and then what actually comes out a while later. I think we first saw this with Watch Dogs, but it's happened with Anthem. It happened with Cyberpunk. Like, it has happened kind of across the board to the point where it can do more harm than good if you are rushing to meet this like hard E3 deadline of getting something out and being a part of the show. And if you're not part of the show, it's like, condemnation of your workflow and things like that. And I don't think it needs to be that way. I think that fans are becoming more and more okay with developers and publishers showing off their games on their own terms. I think everyone is sort of sick of seeing a cinematic trailer for a game and then not hearing anything about it for 3 years, 4 years, something like that. And people are okay with games kind of debuting closer to actual release, which is something we've moved more toward. So I'm not calling to abolish E3 or anything. It's just that I do think its influence has waned quite a bit, and we're seeing maybe half the amount of studios and stuff that are there compared to where there used to be, and everyone else is sort of just doing their own thing, like debuting 20 minutes of gameplay here, a trailer there, announcing your game within a battle royale. Like, the sky is kind of the limit at this point, and E3 as this like one fixture is not really quite a thing anymore. And I don't think this is going to change much once it goes back to being an in-person show. It might be more interesting for the fans and the press now that once it's not kind of just watching live streams and it's actually going and playing things again. But I don't think it's ever really going to fully reclaim its relevance as a kind of industry powerhouse event. And not that there's anything bigger necessarily now, it's just that things are more kind of diffuse and spread out among a series of events kind of all year long. And we will just keep seeing more of that because that is just kind of the age of delivery. You deliver stuff when it's ready. You don't kind of scramble to make these arbitrary, we must show a trailer now deadlines. So that's where I think things are moving. And I guess we'll see what happens in a week or so. Take care.